Thanks everybody for coming out. My name is Deborah Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of A Blade of Grass. I want to thank first our generous hosts this evening, Shelley and Donald Rubin. This is always a great treat to be able to use this fantastic space. You are on the 8th floor, and the 8th floor is a private exhibition and event space that was created by Donald and Shelley to promote cultural and philanthropic activities. Sorry. The exhibition that's here right now is called Draped in Mania. It's curated by Alejandro de la Fuente, and it explores the impact of Afro-Cuban art movement called Grupo Antillano. It's on view until July 18th. A Blade of Grass is the first funding nonprofit that's solely dedicated to nurturing socially engaged art. We do that two different ways. First, we fund individual artists and arts organizations who are working directly with communities in ways that are relevant to everyday life at an ambitious scale to enact social change. We also create a context, for these fantastic artists and organizations by creating programs and web content that explores the challenges and opportunities of social practice. I want to start with just a few announcements. We have a lot going on at A Blade of Grass right now. I want to first announce, I'll get that. I want to announce our first cohort of A Blade of Grass Fellows for Socially Engaged Art. We're really thrilled about this. Our first individual artist fellows are Brett Cook, Pablo Helguera, Fran Illich, Noreen Letty and Liz Slagus, Jan Munn, Lori Jo Reynolds, and Jody Wood. We're totally thrilled to be working with them this year. Our organizational grantees we just announced are Arts East New York, Foundry Theater, and Not an Alternative. Again, three fantastic organizations that we're thrilled to be working with. We have an upcoming program that's going to be a live one. It's going to be really, really fun. It's called Aesthetics of Doing. It's a panel discussion that we do about issues within social practice. It's called Is Socially Engaged Art Always Progressive? It's on April 22nd at 6 p.m. Definitely RSVP. I am going to be moderating. We're going to be talking with Maureen Connor from Social Practice Queens, Joshua Dechter, most recently the author of Art is a Problem, and Mark James Legere, who's author of Brave New Avant-Garde. It's going to be feisty. We might actually install a net here.
To the audience?
Yeah.
Which direction does it come?
I don't know yet. That's a good question. We also have a couple of great things on our website right now. Going on right now is our Growing Dialogue. It's an online discussion series that has new posts coming out every single day for most of the month of April. In the current Growing Dialogue, it's called No Longer Interested, and it started with an essay by Steve Lambert and Jim Dunnigan, Jonathan Habib Inkvist, and Lars Erik Jerkström, and Harold Fletcher and Mary Mattingly are going to be responding to Steve's text throughout the course of the month. It's going to be pretty great. Also, we have a new Fertile Ground essay, a long-form essay by Greg Schillett coming up in the next couple of weeks. So look for that. And then the last announcement that I have, and this is a big one, we have a 3-day conference about social practice coming up called Open Engagement, May 16th through the 18th. We are co-presenting Open Engagement. It's a project of artist Jen de los Reyes. We're co-presenting it with the Queens Museum this year. Space is limited. It's free. It's a free 3-day conference that explores the topics of life and work. You have to register, and space is limited. So definitely through our website or through the Open Engagement website, register today. On to tonight. The format for tonight we call Parallel Fields. What we do is we take two people who are doing very similar work, an artist and a non-artist, and we have a conversation about a specific topic, right? Tonight, it's the best topic ever, it's food, right? So Elizabeth Grady, our program's director, will be moderating the discussion. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Deborah. So, I have the the tremendous pleasure and delight to introduce tonight Don Molesky of Conflict Kitchen and Pierre Thiem of Pierre Thiem Catering. Don is an interdisciplinary artist and co-director of Conflict Kitchen, which is a Pittsburgh-based restaurant that serves changing menu and cuisine from countries with which the United States is in conflict. Supplemented with political discussions, performances, and international online meals. Since 2010, Conflict Kitchen has featured the cuisine and politics of Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea, and their current focus is on the cuisine and politics of Afghanistan. Pierre is a chef, restaurateur, and author of the cookbook Yolale, Recipes from the Heart of Senegal. He also has a forthcoming book. Watch for that. His catering company specializes in presenting West African cuisine to New York audiences. Born and raised in Dakar, Senegal, Thiem also promotes cultural exchange and has been featured on radio and television programs such as NPR's Splendid Table and CNN's Inside Africa. He's preparing to import fonio, which you'll hear about later, by the end of 2014 for mainstream U.S. consumption, working with a women-owned and operated collective in Senegal near the Mali and Guinea border. So please join me in welcoming our speaker. So in bringing Pierre and Don together, what was really interesting is the way that both of them were working with very specific kinds of cuisine and bringing social and political issues into the dialogue. And so what I'd love to do is to give them a chance to tell you a little bit about their work first, and then we'll hear what they have to say to one another. So Pierre, you're on my left immediately, so why don't you give it a start?
Well, my name is Pierre Thiem. I'm from Senegal, born and raised. My focus is introducing the cuisine of my country and by extension of West Africa, because as you may or may not know, the borders of our countries in Africa are pretty much something that was invented in a way with colonization. So the cuisine traverses those borders, and you have the cuisine of Senegal. You can see some influences in different neighboring countries. My focus is to present this cuisine in America because I believe there was a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to African cuisine. And on one side, on the other side too, is to bring it back to my country as well, because we also have that problem due to colonialism. The problem of looking down at what we have, what we eat, and what we traditionally eat. We think that our food should be coming from the other side. What comes from the other side is better, and we tend to import our food, which is really sad. To a point where most of what's in our bowl, in our plate, is imported from the West or from Asia. So this is the focus of my mission, I would say.
Are you all getting hungry?
Yes.
How many people here have ever eaten Senegalese food? So thank you again, everyone, for inviting me to be here. I just want to quickly describe the restaurant. My name is Don Molesky, and I co-run a restaurant in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania called Conflict Kitchen. And I also want to talk a bit about some of the other projects that we do. But first, Conflict Kitchen is a takeout restaurant that only serves cuisine from countries that the U.S. government is in conflict with. And we serve the only Afghan, Cuban, Venezuelan, North Korean, and Iranian cuisine that Pittsburgh has ever seen. So basically, you may be walking down the street one day, and all of a sudden you come across a sign in Farsi. You've never seen a sign in Farsi, and in fact, you may think that that sign is in Arabic, and you walk up to the window and you say, "What are you serving? Is this Middle Eastern food?" No, it's not Middle Eastern food, it's Persian food. Okay, well, what's the difference between Middle Eastern and Persian food? What's the difference between an Arab and a Persian? Or what's the difference between Farsi and
in Arabic, and how can I start to come to those questions through the food? So we serve the food of Iran first. It's a kubadis sandwich, and then the food not only comes to you as a way to discuss the culture, but the food itself comes wrapped in interviews that we've done with people from that country and those that have immigrated to the US. And then we go out of business every 6 months and change up to a new culture and cuisine. This is Afghanistan. And then the whole food wrapper, the facade changes, and all of this we work on with the immigrant community in Pittsburgh, as well as people still living in those countries, to develop all of these aspects of the project. Then we did a Venezuelan restaurant, and we're able to travel to Cuba to show you our Cuban restaurant as soon as this slide goes forward. There we go. And here we are cooking in Cuba. So we've had a chance to do some of the research in these different countries. So going a slide back, we were in South Korea working with North Korean defectors. And Karen and I are going to speak to this a bit about how really when you start to brainstorm and see food as a creative medium, that first starts in the market in a lot of ways. You know, what's available to you. And not only working within restaurants, but working within a familial setting, working with people to show how to roll a piece of bologna out or to make a dumpling and just getting your hands dirty. And so again, people are, as they're tasting the food, they're reading about the politics and culture. So it's very important that we're not only presenting one idea of culture or politics or our editorial of what we feel that you should be learning about these countries, but on the wrappers are the first-person stories of people from those countries. And within each of the subject headings on the food wrapper, you'll hear discursive views from people. So what the reason for people not serving alcohol or alcohol not being available in Iran from one Iranian to another differs you'll find over the population. And so our staff members are trained to have discussions about this, what you would find on the wrapper, and also to admit their own ignorances as Americans about these cultures, and then to bring other people together at the takeout window to have discussions about some of the cultures that we're dealing with. And the idea is for people to also bring us knowledge, so we're not just a pedagogical project in that we are delving out knowledge, but also that we become a point of discourse. And then we hold lots of different public programming and events. Here's a live Skype meal that we held with Tehran with an elongated table and another space butt up against a live projection feed of an elongated table in a Tehran gallery. And we shared the same meal and basically had an intercontinental dinner party over the two continents. And we did a North Korean cooking lesson where a North Korean defector wanted us to learn a couple of different recipes, but didn't just teach it to us in South Korea, but we connected with people all around the world via Skype to do the North Korean cooking lesson. We ran a Paladar sort of situation in Pittsburgh. When we were out of a home for a period of 6 months, we basically took over one person's home and created a restaurant in that home. Karen and I may touch upon what a Paladar is. He's worked in Cuba as well. Where basically there's a situation where because people in Cuba aren't allowed to have private organizations or businesses, they can create that kind of situation for themselves or scenario for themselves for 15 people or under within their homes. And we were also, actually a couple years back in New York, we did a live meal for 250 people serving not only North Korean food, but also South Korean food, where we served North Korean food on one side of the table, and then down a sort of imaginary dividing line, South Korean food on the other side. And then there were two sets of interviews depending on which seat you sat at. You didn't know if you were getting North Korean or South Korean food. Under the South Korean plate, you would find interviews that we've done with South Koreans about how they felt about North Koreans coming into their home. And then under the placemat where the North Korean food was, it was interviews about North Korean defectors about coming to South Korea. And then we also use a public storytelling billboard that we had in our past location as a way to just talk about some of the additional quotes that people had. So like a tragic comedy, the US government's actions has actually helped the Iranian government and hurt the people of Iran. Sort of like this analog Twitter system that we use. Waiting for the next slide. Iran is home to the largest number of Jews anywhere in the Middle East outside of Israel. And again, people are presenting these as their own opinions. It's not necessarily fact. But it's interesting to see what others see as fact. In the US and Iran, drumming up xenophobia is a surefire way to solicit domestic support. And then moving to our new location has been really interesting. We're now in a much more public square. We've served Iranian, Afghan, and Cuban cuisine once again, sort of in response to what's been going on in the news. We're a much more facile organization at this point. And we're in a public square where we're able to do, here's the North Korean cuisine and facade, and then our new Afghan facade. And because we're in this public square, we're able to solicit a bit more discourse with people. So you can see the takeout window we have now, it doesn't allow for as much of a performative nexus where the discussion's really happening between a staff member and a customer. But we do have this wide open space where we hold different programming and events. So for example, we did something called The Foreigner. On the left is Elise Walton, one of our staff members, and on the right, Saurabh Kashani, who is an Iranian. And you were told that not only could you get Iranian food, but you could also speak with an Iranian right now in Iran. So you could say, oh, how do I do that? Well, we have Elise on the other side of the building here. If you go on over to Elise, you can meet her. She's wearing a set of headphones. And there's Elise, and you say, okay, so where's the Iranian? Well, actually, Saurabh is in the headphones through Elise. So you ask the questions to Elise that you would want Saurabh to answer. In real time, Saurabh is hearing these questions, and he answers them to Elise through the headphones. And then Elise delivers his answers verbatim to you through her own mouth. So she kind of becomes this sort of human avatar for Saurabh. And there's a layering of gender, culture, heritage, religion, political beliefs, et cetera, as Elise becomes kind of like this conduit for Saurabh in Pittsburgh. We also produce, or sort of like I guess a bit of a factory for publications in some way, because we've produced different ephemera beyond the takeout wrapper. We also have a few newspapers. One is called The Iranian Speech, where we asked Iranians in Iran what speech they would like Barack Obama to deliver. And then not only was that presented in a written form, but we also had a Barack Obama lookalike present that speech to the public in Chesney Plaza, where the kitchen is located. We did the same with Cuban audience and asked them to write a speech that Cubans would want them to hear, and then had it presented with a better Barack Obama impersonation. So it's basically, we see our restaurant as an opportunity to talk about political cultural dialogue, but not necessarily with an art audience. It's an opportunity for people in public space who come across us that only know us as a restaurant to have a conversation about these things. So we're interested in engaging people within the everyday stream of life. So we were able to do a project in Porto Alegre, Brazil. This is just an example of another project we've done internationally, where again, we were using a public space, in fact, a pond where there were a bunch of swan boat rides, and you could take one with either a Barack Obama lookalike or a Hugo Chavez lookalike. And you would get in the boat with the Barack Obama or Hugo Chavez, and they would say, well, what do you think of me? And you, as a member of the Brazilian public, were able to deliver your opinions, and then they delivered your opinions as first-person speeches, owning the opinions of the public as Barack Obama or Hugo Chavez on these floating platforms in the middle of the lake. And this happened over a period of months. And then just in terms of our international reach, it's been pretty amazing the media attention that we've been able to get, not because we aren't humble, but it's a very important way to spread the project, not in terms of people just knowing about it or the novelty of it, but people have actually wanted to start their own conflict kitchens in all over the world. And we work with them to engage with them about how they can start their own conflict kitchen, talk about the context of their community, what their conflict might be, and talk about how food might be a way to have a deeper conversation. So, right? Don't you think? So I was wondering, what are the most difficult conversations that you've had around food, or is it just sort of like people, they get their meal and they get comfortable and they're just enjoying everything that you've made, and then they sit back and relax, their stomach's full, and they go home. But I'm sure you've been in situations where there have been difficult conversations that have been brought up, that food has been a lubricant for that in some ways.
Well, in my situation, it happened two levels. Here in America, many times when people don't know anything about African food, they tend to believe what the media portrays, the way media portrays Africa. So I had once an interesting question from a journalist who was asking me, first she was shocked to see images of abundance of food in my book, and she was like, wow, I mean, I thought Africa was a continent of scarcity or continent of hunger or famine. So this is something, that a lot of people believe that there is no such thing as a cuisine in Africa. And that's also due to the media. So that's something that I'm constantly actually fighting in a way. I'm happy to see that many hands raised today when they asked about Senegalese food, because I realized that the word is starting to get across. But it really is a challenge. African food is something of an unknown. So that's something, that's an education. That's really one of the challenges I have to face when I talk to Americans, when I try to bring this food as an ambassador of cuisine. But also back home in Senegal too, it's also another kind of conversation we're having to make people realize that the local grains, the local food is actually the one we should be eating. And we tend to think that it's the food that's for the country people. We look down at it. When you're from the city, you think you should be eating this form of rice that's being imported. It's a substandard rice. It's like we call it broken rice actually, because it's over-processed. And that's the rice that we prefer to this wonderful local grain that that's indigenous from Senegal. Or the millet, another great grain. We have great millet, but that's the country. That's just looked down at for country people. We don't think it's worthy of us. We really prefer to eat. Our diet is interesting in the city I'm talking about, right? In the morning begins with like a baguette bread. The French, because of the French colonial past, we have the baguette. But it's great baguette, as good as the one you would have in Paris, but it's baked with wheat that's imported from France. We don't grow the wheat. We have great millet that's much more nutritious, gluten-free and all that, but we prefer the wheat from the French. The lunch is the rice from Southeast Asia. Even the tea, we have a tea ceremony, and that's with tea from China. I mean, that's just interesting that everything that we consume on a daily basis is imported. So there's no way to achieve independence, and that's what that's the most interesting conversation I'm having, and it's difficult to get across, because that's been a mentality that's been, in a way, it's a brainwashing process. It started with colonization and it's still there. It's very much alive, because after colonization, even through independence, there are other people who have much interest in keeping this alive, and that's a tragedy.
Yeah, I was
wondering, for both of you, does the meal context help with navigating these thorny social and political issues? Does that do something for you when you're trying to raise awareness?
In my case, yes, I think that's a perfect situation for that, because especially where I'm from, we tend to eat together. Eating is a social activity. We eat in the community. At noontime in Senegal, everyone comes home. You work, you leave school, you come home, and you eat together. So that moment is a time where we can really exchange and where we can really talk about anything. Really, that's a social moment, and that moment is extended with the tea ceremony. Again, that tea ceremony is like a process. It's like 3 cups. The 3 cups are served in a certain way. It has to be, prepared a certain way with the foam. All that is really buying time to allow us to communicate, to exchange, and that's the time where we really take advantage of to bring certain messages. And to me, it's like the time to talk about the value of what we're eating and the way we're eating.
Yeah, there's a whole dramaturgy that goes with a meal. And it's very difficult to know what sort of theater you should use depending on what audience. So it's hard to choose, should you have a small, intimate conversation to bring up something difficult if it's with tea or coffee or what have you, or do you want to have a meal for 250 people, or do you run a restaurant? and what's the best way to lubricate that situation for difficult conversation to happen. And I know for us, it's been difficult at times to actually have the political conversation that we want people to have at the takeout window, because people already understand that we're a restaurant that's trying to have that conversation. So we sort of shot ourselves in the foot because they're interested in the novelty of the concept, but they're not actually interested in challenging themselves to have that conversation. So our most engaged audiences are people that just sort of come across us and don't know that we're a project and don't know that we're involved in art, and they see that we're serving Cuban food, and they just feel a little grumbling in their tummy. And they think, oh, I wonder what's that? I'm kind of hungry for pork today. Maybe they're serving some pork. And then they come up, and then they don't realize they're going to get the takeout wrapper, or the people at the takeout window are going to have a conversation with them. And so that's when, we sort of do the bait and switch with them. So we don't really give them everything up front. But it's a difficult balancing act with that.
But I think somehow you get the message because it's the rapper too, because at least they go home and they come for it. Hopefully, yeah. But I think that's...
How do you spark conversation if people are not playing along, so to speak?
Right. Well, again, that's something that, just as within any sort of restaurant, you have to train your serving staff or your cooks to engage with the public in a very specific way, because you have your own dramaturgy about your restaurant. Our staff are trained to have those difficult conversations and to keep people there. So, you'll walk up and all of a sudden you're waiting for your takeout food. Here it is, and they take it and they run. They're just hungry and they want to go and they want to sit down or they want to get back to work. And we say, oh no. Did you read the takeout wrapper that we presented to you? Oh, you've been here before, you read. Oh, now what did you think was interesting? Now, did you know the Afghan elections just happened? Now, did you know who got elected? And so you start to have a conversation with them about, I didn't know who I would have voted for, and I was totally ignorant about the fact that there was even an election. Did you know? And then it sort of starts this conversation when you're admitting your own ignorances, or you stop people and you create a situation maybe where they're a little bit uncomfortable. They know they've already bought into the whole restaurant concept. They're engaging with the fact that of the normal process of grabbing food and ordering it. But then you stop them at a point to make them a little bit uncomfortable and hopefully open them up to some curiosity that they may have about what we're presenting to them.
Well, for us, it was a different. It was the same battle, but a different approach, because we in Senegal we had there was a need for complete shift of consciousness in the way they approach the food. We had last year we organized an event called Afro Kids, and the event was pretty much very simple. We brought chefs from around the world, from the US, couple from France, from Cameroon as well, from Togo, from Cote d'Ivoire, and they all met in Dakar. And the idea was to really introduce them to local cuisine. We took these chefs on a culinary tour. These chefs who had no idea most of them had no idea what African cuisine was about, came and they met with farmers, they met with fishermen, they were introduced to the local grains, and they ate as well. They went to the markets, African markets, which are very lively and fun, and they were educated for a whole week, and at the end of the week, they prepared a meal together using only local African ingredients, and that was a great thing, because first of all, the media reacted in a wonderful way. We had Reuters that came and followed the whole event. We had France 24 and BBC. So the media really showed this event as something of a novelty, and the impact it had on the locals was tremendous, because them seeing this media attention and these chefs coming from elsewhere, from those countries that were supposed to have the better product, those countries that we were importing the products from, and see those people paying attention and being interested in what we have to offer. It did have an impact on the locals, and we wanted it to be. This was the goal. We wanted it to have that impact. We wanted people to realize that our millet is great, our formula is great, our local rice is great, the way we prepare our food is great, and more than just bringing the chefs, which was bringing international media attention, we also wanted the cultural actors, the local artists, the musicians, to also bring the message, to contribute in bringing that message. And so that was it was a celebration really of our cuisine during those 5 days of Afro Eats. So this was the way we tried to engage people and bring awareness to the importance of eating local.
One of the things I think is really interesting about having the two of you here together is that, Pierre, you use art as a tool to spread the message about food. Don, you use food as a tool to spread the message about art. How does that how does it work with your customers? I mean, is it important that some of them understand that it's art? Is it important to you that it's art? Or does it not matter at all as long as the message gets across? How does that function for you?
Yeah, I think in general for socially engaged work, for the socially engaged work that I do anyway, it becomes a bit of a boundary when people know that it's art, because they already have ideas of what art means, and they know they're engaging with an artist instead of if you create a newspaper and they're engaging with a journalist, or if you create a set of operas and they're engaging with a librettist, or you create a set of wrestling matches, that's an art project, and they're engaging with an amateur wrestler. I mean, these are some of the things that I do and you want to, in general, work within a community that has a set audience already. So you know that if you create a restaurant, that you're going to have people that are hungry, that are going to come to eat. And so you use that food as the seduction to bring them in, and then once you get them in there, then you get them to engage in the discussion about culture and politics. And then, if they're really interested and they bring it up in discussion, and they want to talk about how it's an art project, or how it's art, or why as an artist you're doing this, or in a forum such as this, then you can have a more interesting conversation about it. But in terms of engaging about political discourse and the difficulties that North Korean defectors are having moving into South Korea, them knowing that it's art, me being an artist, doesn't, create a scenario for them to have that discussion.
And Pierre, I'm interested what inspired you to bring art into the picture. I know that there was some art in your restaurants too in Brooklyn. I'm sort of curious how that kind of wrapped into your cooking practice.
Well, that's interesting that the art wasn't the idea at first, but quickly the restaurant, I realized that people were hungry for culture. Really, the restaurant became the cultural center rather than just the food serving place. So that became the demand, and artists were gravitating around it too. And the local artists, and Senegalese artists, West African artists, decided to use our walls to showcase their work, and that became another occasion to create events, around the new show. A new show was showcasing the artists. It wasn't just the painting; it was musicians. That's why we had events showing musicians. When an artist would come to New York to play, we have great artists, with some coming to play at Carnegie Hall or the great New York venue, but they always would be looking for a moment where they would be in the community, among the Senegalese community, but also among our new neighbors, the Brooklyn community, for that matter. And that was, for me, the opportunity to present my culture, through the restaurant. But food was always the center. Food was always the as opposed to you, food is like the tool that you use to get your message. For me, the message was about the food, introducing this food, changing the ideas, the misconception that African food was not good enough, or not from both sides, from here and from Senegal. Here I remember actually, once I was infuriated. I read this article in the New York Times article, because this journalist had these terms about talking about African food and saying how he had words such as Africans like their meat to be tough, because meat is so rare, and that was like, it was just amazing, and it was just growing up in a country where we love our lamb to eat tender, and I mean that was just it's just one of those examples. I had to use food to make sure food was presented the great way that I knew it was. That I knew I used to eat food. I grew up eating amazing food. I mean, Senegal food is such a big part of our culture. It's just crazy to be able to read an article like this from someone, and the impact it has on all his readership is just terrible. So that's what we're facing as African food restaurateurs.
I'm interested to learn how you go about your research. How are certain foods chosen over others for the American audience? Do you try to accommodate American palates at all for either of you?
Well, no, I don't particularly try to accommodate the American palate, but I do. I do an educated research. I look at where the interest is. For instance, you mentioned this grain that I'm working with introducing. This is a grain that's in demand right now. There's a great demand for gluten-free products. There's a great demand for protein-rich products. This grain is as rich in protein as quinoa. This is a grain that will be in demand because it's a drought-resistant grain. We have a booming water crisis, and this is the perfect grain that matures in 2 months. That's also another advantage of this grain. So it's gluten-free, it's protein-rich, it matures in 2 months. It has great qualities, and most importantly, it's delicious, which is what really is my first motivation. So when I do research, I take all those factors into consideration. What is the need? But I don't try to change the flavor to accommodate the American palate. I also don't impose certain food that I know would have a difficult time getting across. So this grain is a perfect one that will be.
What's an example of that? I'm really curious now.
An example of food that would have difficult time getting across. Well, there are quite a few. We have a method of fermenting, for instance, tradition of fermenting, and that has it can have a strong flavor. It's what we call in Asian cuisine, Korea, umami. Actually, you have that. It's not only Africans, but Africans do use fermentation quite a lot, and we ferment snails, we ferment conch, we ferment fish, we ferment locust beans, and talking about locust in some parts of Africa too, there are it's like a worm, type of worm that I ate it, I enjoyed it, but I think it's going to take a moment before it gets well, it's not only in America, really. Even in Senegal that wouldn't go. I ate it in Zimbabwe, I ate it in Burkina Faso. I mean, I'm the kind of person who would eat really pretty much everything. It's like if you tell me that you eat it, I try it. But Senegalese would have problems eating that worm as well, and definitely New Yorkers would have that problem. Right. So that's I take that into consideration.
Yeah, I think back to some of my early experiences with African cuisine. I was actually in Ghana back in '98, and I remember my first bowl of groundnut soup, which is basically like a soup that has a peanut taste with a big piece of cassava in it. And so I'm being introduced to cassava as opposed to what potato is, and then a large snail with it. And I'm like 17 years old on a foreign exchange trip, and And so it was my first introduction in a lot of ways to that culture, and was the thing that I felt comfortable enough asking questions about versus everything else that I saw going on around me. I mean, there was just so much happening, but I literally had to ask, how do I eat the snail? So that's the first thing. So it's just to delve into the culture. It's an opportunity to, food is a way to invite people to ask some of those difficult questions, and if it starts with food and how to eat something, that's okay. And I think I'm also doing this new project with restaurant owners who have immigrated to San Jose, and working a lot with the Ethiopian and Eritrean restaurant owners. And so what we're doing with them is actually starting teff gardens, so that people know what teff is. So teff is the grain that basically makes the injera, which is if you've ever had Ethiopian food, it's the large, basically flatbread, yeah, if you want to call it a spongy flatbread that all of the sides are on top of. So it's definitely a way in which I as an American can be challenged, but I can also collaborate with people from other communities that have come to America to bring that to Americans that wouldn't want to be challenged by, they'll eat the teff, but they don't know how it's made, or they don't know if it's imported or how it gets there. So, and I think that's something that we try to do in Concept Kitchen as well, is that with our North Korean menu, it was very difficult to choose not to serve meat, or to serve some of the fermented things, or to serve a cold noodle soup in the middle of winter. But these are things that are very important to North Korean cuisine, and that differentiated it from South Korean cuisine. And so giving people that food experience, and even if they read the menu and weren't interested in eating it, at least they had that experience of knowing maybe what was on the menu.
And how do you select your menus? I mean, it's like you ricochet between these like wildly divergent cuisines. How do you learn about all of these foods?
Well, we initially started with Iranian food because we had a collaborator from another project in Iran that my co-director John Rubin had worked on with in other previous projects. And so we knew we had at least one contact in another country that the US was in conflict with, and just started discussing with him how we might be able to collaborate with him on what we were doing at Conflict Kitchen. And then found contacts within Pittsburgh. You just start with one family, and then you go in and cook with them at their home, and you find out their mother's recipe. And then you present that recipe to the rest of the Iranian community, and they say, no, this is not how it's made. There's no kidney beans. You actually use lima beans in this cuisine. So it's just it's really interesting, and again that then calls into question, what does it mean for cuisine to be authentic as you're doing the research, and as Americans, can you create something that's authentically Iranian or Afghan or what have you? But of course, it's just as with the cultural political dialogue that we have. There's no one authentic way to be an Iranian or an Afghan, or one way to present all of these cultures in Pittsburgh. There are a variety of ways, and so that's why it's important that we present people's everyday lives and how they experience them in their own personal opinions. And I don't know if you've experienced that when you've run into other Senegalese people in New York.
Absolutely, and absolutely, you do have that authentic debate all the time. Is it authentic? Is it not authentic? What's authentic? When it comes to cuisine, it's really difficult to say what's authentic, because when you look at the way food travels, how the way ingredients travel, it's like it takes cassava. You mentioned cassava. Cassava is like the African potatoes. It's recognized to be the African potatoes. Cassava was never indigenous to Africa. It came from the Americas. So is tomato. Tomato is like one of the main ingredients in the Senegalese national dish, the cheboudian. We have a tomato-based sauce that makes the rice, the red rice. There's a picture of it if I remember. But tomato is also originally from the Americas. So we embraced it, peanuts. We embraced peanuts. We made this wonderful peanut sauce that you had in Ghana. All over Africa, you see that peanut sauce is also not an imported ingredient. Actually, peanut is interesting because it came during the Colombian exchange, and we took it and we transformed it into this these great dishes that even Latin American never thought about. And then it returned to North America through slavery, which is also another interesting story, how food traveled from Africa to America. A lot of the food that you see in Southern cuisine is nothing but West African cuisine. A gumbo is like the subu kanja in my country. I know a jambalaya is nothing but chebunyebe, recipes, all those dishes. Black eyed peas are right from Africa, okra are right from Africa, eggplants are right from Africa, so did watermelon, even rice. People don't realize that there's two great families of rice, and the one that came to the America came actually from Senegal, southern Senegal, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, which were the other great rice family out of two. They were the one is the Southeast Asian rice and the African rice. The Glaberrima, which is the African rice, is the one that came to the Americas, and that was actually a conscious thing. Slaves were targeted in those regions, in Casamance, in Guinea-Bissau, in Sierra Leone, because of their knowledge of how to grow rice, and they were taken to the Carolinas. So the Carolinas, the rice became the economy of the Carolinas. They called it the Carolina gold. But it's due to the technology that was brought from countries, areas like South Senegal, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And that became now the Carolina gold, and that's part of low country cuisine. So is it authentic? Yes, it is authentic because it became part of, it's an ingredient that the North Carolinas embraced, and they put great things with it. The funny thing is we even looked down at that rice that became a big thing in North Carolina, in the Americas. In Senegal, we prefer to import the rice from Southeast Asia. So to make a long story short, what's authentic, is really the integrity I think you put in when you present the food, when you prepare it. But the ingredients themselves, they travel. Another story is Spain. The national dish of Spain is paella. The rice didn't arrive in Spain until before the Moors brought the rice to Spain in the 16th century, Valencia. So that's also, but that's their dish. That's authentically Spanish dish, right? Paella. It can go any more authentic than that when you talk about Spanish cuisine. So that's confirm what you're saying.
I'm kind of interested to hear what you're curious about in one another's work.
Well, coming from an art background, actually we just found out that we both studied chemistry and physics before we got into, I went to undergrad studying chemistry and physics.
And I did the same thing.
So somehow we both ended up using food as a medium to communicate and work with other, within our own fields. How did you get started with chemistry and physics, and why did you move from that to food?
Well, for me, it was a set of circumstances, really. I graduated in high school in what you call Bac C in Senegal, which is math and physics, really. But after high school, I got oriented in the science department of Sheikh Anta Diop University, which is the main university in Dakar. And that science department, my field, my specialty was physics and chemistry. And the thing is that university, which used to be actually a great university, in the late 80s got caught into a whole period of turmoil, where there was the whole country was going through political turmoil, and the university for the first year, because we had done so many days of strike, for the first year the government decided to shut the university down, and they called it in French année blanche, which is a blank year. That means everyone just fails the year and you have to start over or whatever you do. But so I was facing this situation where I had to make a decision like everybody else, or my peers were in the same situation. And I got fortunate to get a student visa to come to America. And my student visa was taking me to a school in Ohio, it was a tiny school called Baldwin Waters College. And the plan was to go on and finish my physics and chemistry degrees, and I arrived in New York, and I decided to visit New York because I had friends here, and of course New York is a fascinating place. And I'm still in New York 25 years later. my first job happened to be a restaurant. And this is exactly how it happened. The restaurant job was actually as a busboy, and not even in the kitchen. But the restaurant that's no longer around. It was called Carvin's in the West Village. And the chef at that restaurant was just this amazing guy who became a mentor to me, and who realized that I was interested in what was happening behind the kitchen. I was coming from a culture where cooking is a gender-based activity. So, and in this restaurant, only men were in the kitchen, and I'm like, what is going on here? This is something of a revelation to me. And I was always interested, again, being from Senegal, you're interested into food because food is a big part of the culture. We think we have the best food in Africa. We love food, and so I was interested into food, but I'd never considered cooking as a career. And so I am here, and I have this opportunity to be mentored by this great chef, and gradually I started from the bottom up. He allowed me to be in the kitchen as a dishwasher. And as a dishwasher, I started growing into a prep kitchen. And from the prep, I did the garde-manger, the grill, the sauce, and all the stations. And then it took me all these years, and I fell in love with it. And this is my story pretty much. This is how I ended in and it's still chemistry. Cooking is chemistry. So it wasn't really like that drastic of a switch. The switch was really for me cultural. And how I was going to let my parents know that I was cooking. And so it was this was the challenge I had, and it took me a while to announce it. And I did announce it, and it was much smoother than I thought. How about you? How did you?
I was working my way through undergrad, where I was actually an undergrad for about 11 years as basically managing restaurants and serving and things like that. And I still have a side job where I work in the back of the house of a restaurant. And it's just something, it's my way of getting my hands dirty creatively, because I don't make sculpture or drawing or things like that. I mean, I used to do that, but it's my way of being able to be immediately creative and still communicate with other people who don't think that they're creative. You ask people if they're creative, and they say, oh, I can't draw, or I can't play an instrument, and people don't realize that every day they're creative by just putting together like a piece of bread and something on top of that bread. They're making a decision that's going to have an experience with their palate, and that's a very important experience to have every day, and that you are being creative by doing that. And so it sort of keeps my facilities engaged in that way creatively.
Yeah, well, that's usually miss the labs.
No, I don't miss the labs, but I think when we first started Conflict Kitchen and I was doing the food, I didn't have enough back of house experience to actually feel that I was presenting quality food to a Pittsburgh audience. But again, at that point, we were really evaluating it as artists. So we kept a very small menu, and we presented something that you would find was street food in those countries. So the idea was that the food, we only had one item on the menu, and that it would be something you could find on the street. So it was the sort of accessible everyman's food that could be considered maybe a national cuisine in some ways, but it's something that was affordable, and the flavor profiles were accessible. We were serving our kubita sandwich, which is basically ground meat wrapped in freshly baked bread. We would present it as a Persian hamburger. And then we would talk about the different ingredients that were in that, like the basil and the mint and the onion, and talk about how that was politically related to Iran at that point. So at that time, in 2010, a lot of the herbs were being imported from China to Iranians. And that was the one thing that Iranians always had, their own gardens. Even if they had a small apartment, on the little windowsill, they would have at least mint, if not also basil and some other sort of herbs, because you always want that fresh herb to place with. It's very important to Persian cuisine. Is the sort of the hot and not spicy, but the hot elements, like the beef would be considered a hot element, the red meat, and then the cool element, like the basil. and putting those two together. So you always have to have both of those. And so that was basically an opportunity for us to say, so you look at the different sanctions on Iran, and they're pulling it, they're making economic ties with China because of this, and so if you were eating these herbs in Iran, you would find that they were actually coming from China. So it was, we, again, always using the food as a starting point to have a greater political discussion, cultural discussion.
That's interesting.
Speaking of starting points, I think this is a good starting point to open it up for questions. I'm sure that the audience has a lot of questions for both of you. I'm sure they have some time. So Joelle, can I help us?
Can you hear me? My name is Bill Grady. I'm an artist photographer and also very socially and politically involved, concerned and aware. And I find this conversation fascinating and fantastic and very inspiring. But I hardly heard anything directly about art. And that's okay, but it's billed as socially engaged art. I mean, the art seemed to be like an aside. Could you clarify that for me, both of you?
I mean, just to briefly speak about socially engaged art. So when you're working with a public and you create a forum for people to engage with in the public, you basically say that the relationship that you create with the public is the material of the art or the medium of the art. So instead of using photography or sculpture or paint or clay or what have you, we say that the relationship is the art form. That's where there's creative engagement, that's where there's a process that's happening, that's where you have to develop your skills of being able to be a journalist, an interviewer, a person that can carry on a conversation with a stranger or a person that you know very well. There are many other skills that you develop as a relational artist. And perhaps in Pierre's case, probably immediately, it's the food is the medium for his creative and artwork.
The presentation?
Well, the presentation is absolutely the canvas for me. It was, and actually it evolved as I'm just getting more involved into social engagement. You see the Proyecto Paladar, for instance, which is an event that we did.
No,
So,
but how is social engagement different than an organizer or a social?
Well, yeah, I consider that to be an organizing, actually the idea of, I'm going to jump to Afrobeats. The idea for Afrobeats was to become a movement that would conscientize people about the importance of eating local, eating food from home, eating food that was not only because it was bringing back the pride of being just recognizing our own products, but it's also, for me, it was key to truly becoming independent. So food was the medium for achieving this goal of independence, and that was what I saw as the engagement, the social engagement. The art form was when the chefs themselves together creating a meal as using their own creativity. All the chefs from, our chefs, Anita Lowe, who came to Cuba with us, she was in Dakar, Dave Arnold, who was an American chef, and all of them who just got immersed into African cuisine, into Senegalese cuisine for 1 week, and after that 1 week, they just used the ingredients and they created these wonderful dishes. This was art as well. This was instant art, that we eat right away. We are appreciating from at all level. All the senses are involved right there. And, from the tasting, the presentation was amazing. So this to me was, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's exactly how I was seeing it, as being art, as being socially involved and engaging the people and being an organizer in a way that I get the audience to see the message, which is local food is important to consume, and this is the way we need to go. This was the message, and art was the medium was food, the artists, or the chefs, and the artists were the audience eating the food as well. And in Cuba, that was the same concept, differently exposed, but it was we were part of the installation in a way in Cuba, because in Cuba we recreated the paladar inside the museum, inside the Federal Museum, right? We just created a paladar out of recycled shipping containers, and each of us had one night where we used Cuban ingredients and we collaborated with a Cuban chef and just came up with a menu, which was also a culinary art. We came up with a menu, we introduced this menu, and we were the medium, we were presenting the food, and the audience was also not only the spectators, but they were also part of the whole concept. So this is, to me, this is engaged art.
That's terrific. I want to make sure we have enough time for lots of questions.
Hi, my name is Vicky, and I thank you for being here because all of a sudden I think of myself as an artist because I love to cook. And all of a sudden I'm thinking that I could really use this newfound art as a way to talk about political issues. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the responsibility of chefs and home cooks in terms of social, political engagement and how to use this medium of creating food as, you've talked about it already, but thinking of the responsibility that we have as food creators, I would say. Thanks.
I guess that's up to you, whatever responsibility you want to have. I mean, it depends on the discussion what sort of political discussion are you looking to have, do you think?
Any socially engaged one. I mean, there's so many topics that can be addressed. I'm thinking of Jaz's discussion about how history and politics and wars have influenced what is considered as socially acceptable food. And I'm thinking about you going from the political conflict to bring the foods to different roots. But ultimately, you know, if you don't care about politics, politics cares about you. So I feel it's sort of all-encompassing topics.
I think for me, maybe it starts with how do you identify? And I think that's actually something that we haven't addressed that I've run into a lot with people is that I'll ask them, just in the work that I do, you know, where are you from and where have you immigrated from, or perhaps what's your heritage? And people aren't interested necessarily in having that conversation all the time. I met a gentleman who was Filipino the other night, and I said, oh, well, you know, have you connected with the community here in New York? He said, no, I don't want to. I want to assimilate and be a New Yorker. And he's a fashion photographer and has lived here for 6 years or something. And so it's keeping in mind that you need to know if you're interested in identifying yourself first, because if you're going to be speaking politically with food, then you're going to be identifying other people or asking them to identify themselves in some way or to think about those things. So as a creative person, you know, you think about where do you come from. And so I was thinking of myself in general as a person born in Pittsburgh, where there's an incredibly homogenous food environment and culinary landscape, and being 100% Polish and food being, for me, really bland. and I know my culinary heritage landscape, but wanting to present something different in Pittsburgh and wanting to create something, wanting it to be the city that I want to live in. And so to locate those other communities, to work with them and to present that cuisine as an American. And so not ignoring the fact that I'm an American and working with people to create these cuisines. And obviously Pierre's coming to it from the opposite standpoint, being in seven ways.
Yeah, that's exactly true. From the Senegalese chef is a completely different situation. For me, it's really, I cannot disconnect that to the political battle. Actually, it's more than a battle. To me, it's a war. Even what's happening right now is a matter of survival, not only for the culture, but even for the diversity of ingredients that are disappearing, because in Africa, what you're seeing right now is the land grabbing that's happening is terrible. And you have, you're facing that dilemma. And as a chef, you have you must be speaking about that situation, because the land grabbing that's coming up is also bringing species that are foreign to our land, and and not only bringing them, but bringing them in an ethical way of like bringing them and we see grains like fonio that will be completely disappearing if we don't try to bring them to the menu, don't try to introduce them to conscious Americans who will be supporting that fight. But it's really it's a fight, it's a constant fight, and it's a fight that's not only a chef will be fighting. It's a fight that will need entrepreneurs, will need political. It has to be a political involvement as well. It has to be everyone needs to be involved into this. Otherwise, we're in trouble. Oops.
Hi, I wondered if Comfort Kitchen had ever gone global with a tricked out food truck, or would even want to?
Yeah, I think, again, we, as people that are serving food, the first thing you think about is who's your audience going to be. So who are your patrons, who's your art audience, what have you. So that's how you determine, not only, you think about your own interests as an artist or a creative person or a chef and what you want to serve people, but you also think about what are they going to be looking for, how can you address their needs as well as desires. And so being that Conflict Kitchen started within Pittsburgh, and it started because of the lack of diversity in the landscape of Pittsburgh, it wouldn't be able to be repeated in, say New York or San Francisco. It would be a totally different sort of project. And in terms of a food truck, if we were moving around from place to place, we would be engaging with entirely different communities that would perhaps see us only as sort of understand the concept or see the novelty of it, but might not be interested in engaging with the politics. So I think one of the challenges we would have if we would do a mobile food truck is to find partners within each of the places that we would be traveling, whether it's cultural or political partners or CDCs in the areas, and make sure that we're working with them, other people that have a stake in the community first, because what we've been able to do in Pittsburgh at least is to develop an audience of people that are coming back for the food or for the discussion or what have you, but we've created a base in Pittsburgh, which we're not going to be able to do if we show up and pop up, for a week or a day in Austin and Houston and Portland or what have you.
We have time for a few more.
Hi, my name is Tyler. I run a community-based arts organization in the East Village. And Don, I wanted to ask, I'm really interested in the product of the food, but I'm probably even more interested in the process of its cooking and its purchasing. So with that in mind, I'm wondering how participatory you feel Conflict Kitchen and the work they do is, and whether or not you have employees and customers, or whether your employees are artists also and your customers are participants in this project, and how the language of art versus the language of commerce serves your work.
Right. Yeah, we're definitely a business. We have a bottom line. When we first started, our budget was $500, and 3.5, 4 years later, it's $1 million a year. And all of that is from food sales. I'm able to pay myself, my co-director is able to pay himself. We have 14 employees. When we hire people that are good cooks and that are able to work in retail or to serve people, but also people that are able to be curious about the political and cultural landscape of Pittsburgh and are outgoing and willing to have discussions. So it depends on I could talk to you after about your project. I'd be interested to hear what it is, but really what the mission of your project is. You know, you have to consider that. So, so we're not going to hire artists because we're not presenting an art project to the city. We're presenting a restaurant. So we have to make the best food that we can. We hired a culinary director 2 years ago because my food was definitely not cutting it, and we needed to expand the menu. And then in terms of doing things like, you know, and we talked about this briefly before, like the process of searching for the food, for shopping, is a creative process. Because that gets you really into the community. At that point, you're not waiting for the community to come to you, you're going to them. And you're starting to figure out like what's being sold, what things are offered, what's available to you, what are the prices. That gives you a sense of like what the cultural landscape is in an area too. And actually, I wonder if Pierre would relate this story that we talked about when he was in Cuba and was trying to look for fish in Cuba. I thought that was a very interesting story.
Yeah, it really was actually surprising that going island, Cuba, and we expect fish to be plentiful, and it was so regulated. The only fish option we had was frozen, and I had this vision of this meal that I wanted to prepare, just plan it for weeks before the trip, and now I don't have access to fresh fish. Luckily, I was teamed with this wonderful chef, which was Osmani. He had a galleria, the Paladar in Cuba, and he took me to an underground place 2 hours from Havana. I mean, it was a trek to get there. We had a flat tire, and that was a perfect opportunity to actually see the Cuban solidarity in action. He had a flat tire, and he didn't have an extra tire, so someone else came and went out his way to bring him something, and someone he didn't really know. Just a side story, but we got to the fisherman village and we bought the fish underground. He said we couldn't get caught doing that because that was an illegal activity. And we got the fish this way, and that that was sourcing fish in Cuba was a challenge. And that's just that experience taught me a lot. Really, you know, I was thinking that what the challenge is in getting the fish, but also the advantages of getting the produce in Cuba was also another great experience. You know, realizing that everything, vegetables and fruits was organic. I mean, it's just amazing. It's like it's a poor country. They're facing the embargo and all that, but that they were able to turn it into their advantage, and every Cuban eats really quality produce and quality fruits. And I even found this amazing green that we call never die in Senegal. I found it in the produce market, and that's a green that Cubans don't cook with. They call it the African greens, and that's medicine to them. And we know it to be medicine as well in Senegal. But we cook it, we use it it's a great green. We make salads with it, we make stews with it. It's just a green that comes in many different ways in our diet. And I used it as an ingredient of my menu that day. And a lot of Cubans remember we had this the TV came and interviewed me. They were really shocked that I would be using that green in the menu, and I was like, well, wait until you taste it. I mean, it was really well appreciated. So yes, it was a challenge to get the fish, but it was great to have the greens, and that was the experience I learned from Cuba.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, and then the conversation can certainly continue afterwards.
Hi, thank you very much. My question is for Don. I'm really curious, how do you define in conflict with? Because that in itself is such a complicated question, and I would just be curious to find out how you deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, very simply, we wanted to have a broad definition. So again, what one American thinks about conflict should be based on their own personal decision-making and opinions instead of what the media tells them, who the media tells them we're in conflict with. So the idea is that initially we wanted to have people think about the fact that people are in conflict with other people, that governments are in conflict with other governments. And so using that as a framework, we talk about armed conflict and war to proxy wars. We're going to be doing a Palestinian version. at the end of the summer, to the embargo with Cuba, to more complicated conflict with, say, Venezuela, where they're one of our biggest providers of oil, yet at the same time we have so many ideological conflicts with them, so it's complicated. America has their hands in almost every country in the world, and so there's bound to be conflict with almost everyone in some way.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you, fantastic panel. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Stay, have a glass of wine, continue the conversation. Thanks.